Hey government, this is Miss Corie. All right, so this video is not required for you to watch, but I'm making this video because sometimes slideshows can be a little confusing. And if you're like me, when I have to read slideshows or even just read like anything out of a textbook, pretty much I read it and I forget it about 5 seconds later. So that's why I'm making this video, is in order to help those of you who kind of want me to talk through more things to get more of a grasp on concepts. So again, it's not required to watch. It's just more of a tool to help you out. But I do recommend that you do look through the slideshow that I did post into the resource folder, just because for the vocab words, I put them in red, so it's a little bit easier to find them. Now, if you've had me before as a teacher, like for world history or something, you know that I like my videos. This video is not going to be as polished as those videos are because these are slides that I did not make. I just added some things into them, and I might like stutter more and have to like think for a second. I might also just breeze through and skip over stuff as well. So just that you know that. All right, so let's get started, shall we? If my internet is working. Let's refresh that real quick. There we go. All right. So again, these are not my own slides. I'm just adding things to the slides in order to help you understand some of the vocab words. Vocab words will be in red. So let's start with the first one, the purpose of government. So one of your vocab words is government. The next kind of two slides talk about government. So government is the formal structures and institutions through which decisions are made for a body of people. Most governments today exercise power within the context of a state. Governments function to ensure national security, maintain order, resolve conflict, provide service, and provide for the public good. And many theories have been put forth to explain why governments exist and the source of government's authority. So, like one of the really big pieces to the government, like would be like the National Guard. So, like the Minnesota National Guard plays a big role, and so does all the other states' National Guards. So, what is the purpose of government? The main idea is understanding major political ideas and classic forms of government will help you understand the purpose of government. So, we're going to answer some questions today, like what is government? Which major characteristics do all states share? What are the major functions of government, and what theories of rule have been put forth to explain government? All right. I'll say right now, your textbook is really old. So, these slides are from the textbook that you have, but I don't know how we read it once in a while. But just to put it in context, so their example for life without government would be in the Bosnian War, which I had to look at myself, which happened in the early 90s. So here's a picture of UN peacekeepers take cover as residents run under sniper fire in Sarajevo's Sniper Valley in Bosnian War. So what is government? Government is made up of the formal institutions and processes through which decisions are made for a group of people. Okay, so that's kind of the dictionary version of what a government is. There are three main components to government. The first one is the people. People elect officials with authority and control over others. Public servants who carry out day-to-day government business. Example of that would be like Melvin Carter, who is the mayor of St. Paul. Another main component is power, legislative to make laws, executive to carry out, enforce, and administer those laws, and judicial to interpret laws and to settle disputes. So a good example of that would be like the Supreme Court. They're going to be the ones interpreting a lot of Minnesota laws. Then you also have policies. So policies are decisions made by government in pursuit of a goal, can be a law, a government program, or a set of government actions. So an example of that would be like the Taylor Swift bill, which passed in 2024 earlier this year. That's the Minnesota government mandate ticket sales companies to disclose all fees on events tickets, because you would get those junk fees. So like a policy would be the Taylor Swift bill where the junk fees went away. All right. So describe the three main components of most governments. Again, people. So those are the rulers and the ruled, power, which is government authority, and policies, which is decisions made by the government. Okay, so let's talk about the characteristics of a state. So a state is a political unit with the power to make and enforce laws over a group of people living with the clearly defined territories. Characteristics of a state would be population. So it must have people. The number does not matter. It could be millions, could be hundreds, doesn't matter. Any population works. It also has to have a territory. So it must have a very clear, defined, and recognized border. So my example for this one would be not like a US example, but like a German example. So, like the state of Bavaria in Germany. So you can see here on this map, you can see it has very defined borders right there. Okay. So it's not like, oh, that's maybe a part of it. No, very defined borders. The government must have a government that issues and enforces rules for the people living within its territory. Government must be recognized from within and by other nation states in the international community. So that's a really big one. You can't just declare yourself a state. You need others to recognize you. So, for example, with Japan and the United States, you can see both the leaders are here recognizing each other, doing like a press conference or something. I don't know. All right. And then sovereignty. So sovereignty means that they must have supreme power to act within its territory and to control its external affairs. So most of the time that means it has a military. Now, when we say state, you might think of things like Minnesota and Texas and like New York. Yes, those are states. But you also have to think that states aren't always just like the United States. Like states exist throughout the world. States could also mean countries within a larger organization as well. So Italy and Germany would be considered states to the European Union. So that's the only thing with America and our states. It gets a little bit confusing with the definition. But let me know if you have any questions with that. Okay, here are some theories about origins of the state. I'm going to skip that. So why is sovereignty important to a state? If you don't know what sovereignty means, it means freedom and power to govern oneself. And that would be a state needs to have both the power to act within its territory and authority over its external affairs. Okay, so again, functions of the government would be like to ensure national security, maintain order, resolve conflict, provide services, and provide for the public goods. All right, so digging a little bit deeper into that. So we talked about ensure national security. So that's where the state would guard its territory and its people against external threats, create and maintain national defense forces, including military personnel, weaponry operations, as well as peacekeeping missions. And also to maintain good relationships with other nations. So for guard its territory and its people against external threats, like, for example, one of the really big functions that the government had back in 2020 was to help with the pandemic, like administering COVID tests and vaccines and stuff like that. That would be a really good example of national security, but also to maintain good relationships. So, like, here's a picture of the US's president with Mexico's president. So definitely maintaining friends with other countries, especially ones that border us. And then 2 is to maintain order. So that's just laws that help maintain order and protect rights, property, and lives. Must have clear rules for unacceptable behavior and consequences. So if you do something bad, right, you usually go in front of like a judge, and you might even people might even be sent to like jail or prison or like house arrest or something like that. Also, different societies have different ideas about lawful behavior and appropriate punishment, and must have means to identify the punished wrongdoers. The 3rd would be to resolve conflict. So some use intimidation and force, most use politics and justice system. For example, if you ever see like unions on strike, that would be kind of a big role of the government, is to help negotiate those strikes, and groups try to influence government decisions through politics. 4, to provide services, so people pay taxes to fund services such as parks, mail, and education. And public goods include clean water, parks, and roads. Restricted services may include medical care, high schools, and public housing. So like the Boundary Waters Canoe area, that's a really good example of providing services, because you can just go and explore nature, and it doesn't typically cost you too much money. 5 would be to provide for public goods. So the definition of public and public good does change over time. And these questions are addressed throughout the political process. So kind of an example of like a public good would be like parks, okay? So like Theodore Wirth, he was a really famous guy in like Minnesota history because he was the creator of most of Minneapolis's parks. So he would be kind of a person that would provide a lot of public goods. All right. So, how might ideas about the public shape a policy? So, here's my example. So, pretend that there's a neighborhood with lots of kids in it. This may lead to city building a splash pad. Okay. So, how might ideas about public shape policy? So, as notions of what constitutes the public change, government policies will change accordingly. So, as different people come in, or they adapt, or they get older, they get younger, things change. All right. There's also some theories to rule. For example, there's the legitimacy of rulers. So, what makes some forms of rule more acceptable than others? Rulers have to be legitimate. They're seen as right and proper by important segments of a nation's population. So, their governance is voluntarily accepted by the people. That's one of the reasons why we vote for a lot of our political people. So, an example of that would be like George Washington, because all the founding fathers found him to be like a really legit ruler because he did like military stuff. And yeah, there's also divine right. So divine right is when a ruler is believed to be chosen by like the god or gods. A good example of that would be like ancient Rome, ancient Greece, China before like the West really got contact with them. Same thing with Japan. All right, we'll skip over that. There's also the natural laws and natural rights. So natural law is a system of rules derived from the natural world. Natural law binds citizens and rulers alike, and that the belief that all people possess natural or human rights. And this was supported by a lot of really famous historical people like Aristotle, Cicero, Augustine, and Thomas Aquinas. If you took world history with me last year, you would know them. Okay, anyway, and that does actually go into what the US politics are today. So, like the saying life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that is considered a natural law that everyone has like the right to have a life, to have liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. There's also the social contract theory, which plays a really big role when we talk about the ancient world. So that's where governments were formed and people agreed to submit to state authority in return for protection and support. We'll skip John Locke. I don't really want to talk about him. All right. So, how might ideas about the political shape policy that people are good in their natural state? I don't even know what this means. It's just in the slides. So let's move on. It's not on the test. I'll promise you that. So let's look at forms of government. So forms of government can be grouped into categories based on who exercises authority and how power is distributed. So within a government, how power is shared between a central government and local governments determines whether a government has a unitary, federal, or confederal system. So most democratic governments have either a presidential or parliamentary system of government, which is true. The United States has presidential. United Kingdom would have parliamentary. In president systems, power is divided between the executive and legislative branches. In parliamentary systems, the function of the executive and legislative branches are often combined. So we'll talk a little bit about that. I know you're like, wait, this is US government, not world government. Yeah, we'll learn about parliament for a little bit. So, main idea of this little section here is different forms of governments are categorized based on who exercises authority and how power is organized. Okay, so for example, the two Koreas, right? During the Korean War, Korea split up. I'm sure you learned about this in US history. That's a really like strong example about two very stark contrasts between two different kinds of governments. So, all right, so here's a bunch of different forms of government. And I'll just brief through some of these. So the first one would be like a monarchy. So that's usually ruled by a king or a queen. And then constitutional monarchy is where there's like a king and a queen, but their powers are very limited into what they can do. There's also the dictatorship, where just the single person holds all the power. Totalitarian regimes. That's again where there's a dictator that has unlimited authority, and the government really tightly controls all aspects of life, um, and there's really no limits to their power. In an oligarchy or an aristocracy, that would be like a small group of people make most government decisions for their own benefit, and membership in the ruling group may be based on wealth, family, or military power. That you don't really see in the modern day anymore. That would be more like with ancient stuff. There's also the theocracy, where rulers are like religious rulers like rule over a government. And then you have direct democracy, which is one of your vocab words. So let's talk about that one. A direct democracy is when a government is by the people. Citizens are the ultimate source of government authority. Citizens come together to discuss and pass laws and select leaders, and this works best in smaller communities. Then there's also the republic/representative democracy. That is what the United States has. So the difference between the two is direct democracy would be like people vote directly for like laws and legislation. They don't vote for representatives. With a representative democracy, which is what the US has, that's where people would vote for representatives, and then those representatives then make the law. So there's kind of like that extra middleman step in between. All right. So again, we talked about monarchy, and then also dictatorship. So a monarchy is where the government's headed by one person. In an absolute monarchy, that one person has all the control. But today, constitutional monarchies are mostly what's there. They're still like a king or queen of a country, like with Spain or like England or something like that. Dictatorship is when just one person or maybe even just a small group of people hold the unlimited power, and that power is maintained by force, not by the will of the people. All right, let's keep on moving here. So democracy. So democracy means rule by the people. In a pure democracy, the people make major governmental decisions through a process of majority rule, which what we know as today as voting, right? That's what it is in the United States. So in a direct democracy such as Athens, citizens met regularly to discuss issues and vote for leaders. And then Athens was actually an elite-based system, so pretty much only the rich were the ones who ever got to make the decisions. But in a republic, so what we have in the United States, a representative republic democracy, the people elect representatives to make decisions on their behalf. Okay, so in a representative republic democracy, the people are the source of the authority, right? We are the people who vote for our representatives, who vote for our politicians. Okay, so elected representatives closely follow the wishes of the people. Elections are free and fair, and everyone can participate equally in the political process. Well, of course, in the US, you have to be at least 18. So, all right. Yeah, so who holds the political power in a representative democracy? It is the people. All right, and then we can talk a little bit about the three systems of government. So, yeah, this isn't like the most exciting thing to talk about, but we'll talk about it real quick. So when it comes to organizing national power, so with national power, that consists of a number of smaller administrative units, and control can be centralized or spread across geographical regions. Unitary system is sovereignty rest in a single national government with unlimited authority and has the power to change or abolish local governments. There's the federal systems, which divides power between a national government and smaller regional ones, which is like what we have, right? We have like the US government, and then we have our state governments like the Minnesota government. And levels act independently but cannot abolish or reorganize other levels. And then we have the confederal system, whereas independent states join forces in a central government, and states delegate limited powers to the central government for common interests. We also have a little bit of that. Okay, yeah, we'll just keep going after that. Yeah, this shows you how old the textbook and the slides are. So when these like textbook and slides were made, President George W. Bush was in office, and he came out of office in 2009, which most of you were maybe not even born, or you were just babies. So anyway, let's keep on going. So let's talk about presidents and parliaments. So governments are formed through historical circumstances, as you probably learned in U.S. history, like the Revolutionary War. Today, most countries have some form of democratic government. So that is either a presidential system like we have, or a parliamentary system, which the biggest example would be like the United Kingdom. So with the presidential, so the president is elected by the people for a limited term of office, and it's the head of state and in charge of the executive branch, and it deals with cabinet members, policy, armed force, foreign affairs, and domestic legislation, and also powers checked by the legislative branch, which would be like Congress. And then with a parliamentary system, most democracies are modeled after the British system, so that's why I use them as an example. That's where the executive and the legislative branches are actually combined into one. They're not separate like we have here in the United States. And the prime minister is chosen by and from the parliament. So what it is you have all the legislators in the United Kingdom, okay? And they are the ones who vote for the prime minister or the head of the nation. Versus here in the United States, we don't have our legislatives people vote for or like choose who the president is. We, the common, everyday, average people, do. So that's kind of the really big difference between us and the UK. And then also, the prime minister appoints cabinet members for the majority party. So, how does electing a president differ from electing a prime minister? So, a president is elected by the people, whereas the prime minister is elected by the legislator or parliament. So, here's kind of this infographic. I know it's really fuzzy, but it's the best infographic I could find. So, like here with the United States, so us voters, we're the ones who vote for the commander in chief or the president. But with parliamentary, it's the voters who vote for the legislative, and then the legislative vote for the prime minister, who is then the head of the country. All right, so let's talk about democracy in the United States. So American democracy has been guided by a core set of democratic ideals, such as liberty, equality, and self-government, since our nation's earliest days. So U.S. citizens ensure the continuation of democracy by committing to uphold basic principles of American democracy, including the worth of the individual, the rule of law, majority rule, minority rights, compromise, and participatory citizenship. Economic freedom and the free enterprise system have a special place in American democracy and help preserve liberties and limited government. So, democracy in the United States, the main idea for that is that American democracy is characterized by core democratic ideals and principles, as well as by the free enterprise system. All right, so what are the ideals? So, concepts of something in its most perfect form, core ideals of American democracy include liberty, equality, and self-government. Also, used for the beginning of a republic, which I hate how they phrase that, like, right, when like Declaration of Independence is signed, like everyone has liberty, equality, and self-government. That is not true at all, because if you even paid a little bit attention in U.S. history, you would know that women and people of color at the beginning of the United States did not have these ideals. Also, these concepts were recorded in our nation's founding documents, kind of like the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, and today they still guide our government. There's also liberty, so that's the ability of people to act and think as they choose. Choice must not do harm to the liberty or well-being of others. There's the freedom from government control and freedom to exercise citizens' rights guaranteed under the Constitution. For example, the right of religion. All right, so equality is all people possess a fundamental moral wealth. Their worth entitles them to fair treatment and equal opportunity. Equality must be balanced with liberty to avoid despotism. I don't know what that word means, but cool. And then you have self-government. All people can rule themselves and do as a political equals. People are the ultimate source of government authority. Governments derive their power from the consent of the governed. So that means like the people have to approve their government. And then the people have the right to revolt against a government that has lost their consent. So, what steps did the founders take to protect liberty? The answer to that would be they identified basic rights of the people, and then through the First Amendment, for example, declared them off limits from government and interference. So, like the right of religion, the right to assemble, and the right of speech or the freedom of speech. Those are some like the most important things that are the foundation of, well, the United States, to be honest. Okay. There's also the worth of the individual. So that's where people can reach their highest potential if they pursue their own path. There's natural capacity for reason, intellect, and self determination, and democracy values individual freedom, personal responsibility, self reliance, and individual achievement. There's also the rule of law, which is a government of laws, not of men. So the US government and officials are subject to limits on power. So that's why we have checks and balances. We'll talk a little bit more about what checks and balances are a little bit later. And also limits are spelt out in the Constitution, which we'll also talk about later. So next, let's talk about the majority rule and the minority rights. They're a little confusing, to be honest. So I will try my best to explain them. So, majority rule and minority rights. The decision making is typically by majority rule, but it's always balanced out by minority rights. So, with a majority rule, that means politicians can make decisions and pass laws as long as they have the majority vote. So, if you were like watching Congress or something like the Senate do something, to pass a law, they need 50% of the people plus one to pass that law. And that's where it gets really tricky in American politics because we have a two-party system. So if like a Senate was split in half, usually laws aren't passed very often. I know, a lot of tricky stuff. Then you also have the minority rights. Now, this is a vocab word, but the slideshows never gave an answer to what minority rights actually means. So this is kind of what I came together of what minority rights means. So that's where politicians who are not in the majority, okay, and they have protection from the majority's party's laws and decisions. So for example, if Party A was the majority, Party A just can't write a law to kick out Party B from the government just because Party B is the minority. So even the minority parties have like some protection, although probably not a lot of their laws get passed. There's also individual rights are protected under the liberal democracy. Compromising, that is such a huge thing in American politics. That is the ability of two opposing groups to give up some demands and agree. And it's necessary to keep the political process moving. So, for example, a modern day like compromise would be like when Governor Walz signs a compromise school resource officer bill. And then also citizen participation. So, citizen must be informed about public issues and many ways to participate peacefully, respectfully, and with tolerance. So pretty much not with violence. All right. So why is it important to protect minority rights in a democracy? Because a minority is no less entitled to the rights than the majority is entitled to theirs. That's right. All right. We also have free enterprise, which is a big thing in the United States because we have a lot of industry. So free enterprise means economic freedom. Free enterprise allows both people and business to make their own economic choices, such as how to produce, distribute, and exchange goods and services. Limited interference from government also protect rights of ownership to property and to result of one's labor. It is key to preserving other freedoms and to allowing people to build wealth, thereby empowering them to limit government power. And also free market is essential. So open competition results in better products offered at lower prices. Those who succeed in the competition will prosper, and prosperity will benefit society and the economy. Which is an interesting concept because this, like in theory, this would be true, but in reality, it's not this simple. All right, you'll probably learn about that in econ. That's next semester, so let's keep on rolling. Okay, yeah, let's just do that. Okay. So with the constitutional government, our nation's founding fathers struggled with how best to prevent government abuse of power. Their answer was to establish a constitutional government that protected individual rights by placing limits on what governments can do and how it can exercise power. So we're getting a little bit more into the mix of like history and how our Constitution came about. Oh, is this the end? Oh my gosh, I can't believe we went through all of this. So we'll learn more about that in the next video, or if you just get sick of this video and want to watch the slides, I understand that too. Anyway, if you have any questions, please let me know. I'm here to help you. I'm sorry this wasn't a super exciting video, but that's okay because I'm here to help. So please do let me know if you do have any questions. All right, thanks for watching. Bye.